So my bread and butter is sheet metal working. I got into the trades through Job Corps. I went there for welding and learned several different welding processes while I was there. My first welding gig was for a manufacturing plant that made rail cars, and that was in Portland, Oregon. So I worked there for a few years and ended up getting into joining Local 16, the Sheet Metal Workers Union. From there, the first job I worked was non-union, but got into the Sheet Metal Workers Union as a welder and worked for a company that builds basically bridges, oil rigs, dams, like just large structural projects, you name it, like this company builds it. And I worked on the Golden Gate Bridge retrofit, but it was a lot of building parts in the shop that got shipped to San Francisco and then installed by another company. Helped build probably 3 mobile oil rigs that went up to Alaska. One of the things we built broke a bridge on the way up there.
What? Oh,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's how you keep the work coming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we build bridges and we'll break them for you too. Yeah. And then from there, I was probably there for about a decade and then I went to the shipyards in Portland and worked for a company there. And I worked in their fabrication department, which is all new build. So helped build several barges and then transferred over to their marine division, which is just ship repair. So I worked on a lot of Navy vessels, barges, and cruise ships all coming in for repair. Got to work on a lot of cool stuff. Probably the weirdest job I worked on was what's the name of it? I forget the ship's name, but they repair nuclear submarines. And so they're set up for nuclear reactors or whatever. So you had to get like radiation trained before you could go on the ship. And then on top of that, they had armed sentries wandering around the ship. So it was like I had to go repair a bulkhead in their main server room. So you got to check in your cell phone and then you're escorted in there by an armed escort and he's standing behind you with a rifle while you're sitting there working. It was super crazy. You felt like literally under the gun, but that was probably the strangest and coolest job that I worked on. And then I did that for about 3 years. And then I ended up, so within our union here, at least in Portland, I don't know how it works elsewhere in the country, but here it's divided into 2 sections. You have the production side, which is what I was on. And then there's the mechanical side, and they do light steel, mostly light steel. They do have heavy industrial shops that are under that umbrella, but it's all like HVAC or architectural sheet metal. And I ended up going through a 5-year apprenticeship for that. So basically furthering my education, the apprenticeship itself got me college credits. I would go to school 5 weeks out of the year. So they'd break it up. So about every 2 or 3 months, I'd go to school for a week. And I journeyed out actually just last year in September. And yeah, thank you. And definitely making a lot more money than I was on the production side and better benefit, better retirement. So I currently work for a company and mainly what I do is just HVAC install. I do a little bit of architectural sheet metal. It's not my favorite thing because I'm working outside. And the current job that they've got me on, I'm outside. It's been real interesting the last few days. But yeah, it's awesome and I love it, dude. It's funny because I originally, ever since I was 12 years old, like my goal in life was to be a chef. That was like what I wanted to do. Like I started cooking and baking real early on, and I still love to cook and bake. And I actually went to Job Corps for culinary, and their program was full at the time for that. So my second choice was welding, because when we toured the center, when we go into the welding shop and I see fire and I see sparks, I'm like, oh, this looks cool. So I ended up having that as my second choice. And when I completed that program, they offered to put me into culinary since it was my first choice. And I was like, you know what? 1 year here is enough for me. And I'm super happy that I chose the career path that I did, because I did work as a line cook for about a year for Red Robin. And it was brutal, dude. Like working full time as a metal fabricator and then part time as a line cook, it got pretty hairy. You don't get your weekends, you don't get your holidays. And I'm super used to having like my holidays and my weekends. And it was definitely felt like I dodged a bullet. Job Corps is a fantastic resource. And just to touch on that a little bit too, a lot of people go in there not knowing what to expect. And one thing to expect is there's a lot of rules, like a lot of rules. It's super uncomfortable. It really is. It like you have to really keep your nose clean because they're in the business of getting people trained and through and they're packed. Like all the centers are packed and they have a lot of people. So if you're not cutting it, they got no problem getting rid of you. And it's just the way it is and it's the reality. So all I have to say is if you're going in there and you're not used to following rules, get used to it real quick. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be worth it. Like just buckle down and deal with it because it'll suck. It will, but it's worth it. Absolutely worth it.
If coming out of Job Corps, what do you wish you could have changed as far as like resources or like exploration tools?
If my life was not the life that I have today. So I actually met my wife at Job Corps. We have 2 children. So we got a 13-year-old and a
Cool.
16-year-old. If my life was not like that right now, I would have, if I had known about apprenticeships or that was like even a thing, I would have absolutely gotten into this apprenticeship day one, like when I was looking for work. It sets you up, you get paid to learn. And especially, I know that you wanted to focus on Job Corps, and I definitely support Job Corps, and it's definitely a resource, especially for underprivileged youths. That's why I went, because I couldn't afford to go to school. But if there's anybody trying to get into construction, look at the apprenticeships available. Apply for apprenticeships. It skips that whole step of Job Corps, and you get paid really well to learn your craft. And but yeah, especially kids that are 16, because if I recall, it's 16 through 24 years old are the people that are going to Job Corps. If you live in an area where there isn't a lot of work, Job Corps is a great resource. If you're under 18, again, Job Corps is a great resource. And if you can't get into an apprenticeship, go to Job Corps. At least you get that training. You know what I mean? But I definitely don't regret going to Job Corps. That's for sure. It's just like one of those things where it's like, wow, I could have been doing really well a lot earlier and skipped those first like 10 years of what I was doing. And my pension would have been a lot better than it is today, because the way that the production side works is each shop has its own contract. Whereas on the mechanical side, every single company has the same contract. So it doesn't matter what company I go to, I'm making the same wage and I'm getting the same benefits, and I'm getting the same amount of money put into my pension, my vacation, all that stuff. So it makes it a little simpler. I guess that's pretty much the only thing I would change is get into an apprenticeship right away. I really appreciate you doing this, man. And I'm more than happy to do more of this if you need anything down the line. Like I said, like we're desperately in need of people, and I'd like to encourage people to do it. Even if it's not welding, dude, there's so many trades out there. You got the electricians, the iron workers, the carpenters, painters. There's so many options. And if you can get into the electricians union, I would do that because they make a lot of money.
And it's not as hard on the body sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
So did you have to start over from scratch going from welding to sheet metal, or did you get to like, carry over any?
So no, anything that I have in my pension prior to that, it still contributes towards my current pension. As far as starting from scratch as a craftsman, I did, because I no longer worked for a company that knew who I was and the work that I do. And one of the first jobs I did was for another company. We were installing an HVAC system for a middle school. And I had to tell the foreman, like straight up, I was like, dude, just so you know, like I've got, I guess at the time I had about 13 years of experience in metal work, fabrication. I know how to fabricate metal, but the thinnest thing I've ever worked on is like a 1/4 inch. So like this light gauge stuff
Burn
is
right through it. Yeah.
totally new to me. And he was like, oh, no problem. He's like, we got you. And I was learning how to hang duct like on that first job. And it was so much easier on my body too. I was used to crawling through bilges and crawling through tight spots and dragging all kinds of heavy equipment with me. And then going from that to like working on ladders or lifts and just putting some duct up and hanging it. It was a little bit of a transition, but I caught on pretty quick. But then, and then also as an apprentice, your first term apprentice, people treat you like you're super, super green, like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And which was fine. And it was an adjustment period for me where I was like, someone's like talking to me like I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, I had like first term apprentice. This is they're doing what they have to do.
Yeah.
So I had to prove myself starting off, but it got a lot easier over time.
Are you pretty booked with work, or does each project have like downtime where you're looking for the next union job or whatever?
So in Portland in particular, there's quite a bit of work. The
Yeah.
company that I currently work for has work and is able to keep us busy, but it's spread real thin. And it's just and it's typical for the construction industry to for there to be dips in production and stuff. But currently they have me at a high-tech plant. They make microchips, and we have
Hmm.
a standing contract with several of these companies in Portland. We're usually like demoing old duct and installing new stuff. And there's just like little jobs here and there, but it's been keeping me busy getting my 40 hours. But we have a job coming up for Portland State, or sorry, the University of Portland, which is a combination of new build plus a little bit of a renovation. So they're basically adding a new building on an existing building. So we'll have a little bit of work in both. But that'll be the first job that I will be running lead on. It's taken me 15 years to get into that position, but I'm getting there. I'm excited, not particularly nervous because the general foreman I'll be working with, I have a really good relationship with. And the two guys that are slated to be on that job with me, I've worked with before. One of them's an apprentice and the other one's a journeyman, but we all click and get along really well. And that's one of the things I love about this company too. I've worked with some pretty terrible people, and there's that first company that I worked for when I first got in, not the very first company, but the second company. There was one guy that I worked for that nothing I did was ever right. He criticized everything that I did, and it just beat me down like every day,
Hmm.
and did that for about 2 years. And it got to the point where I was just like waking up every day, like debating whether I wanted to call in sick or play hooky or whatever. And it started wearing on me. And I was bringing that home with me, and my wife could see it. My parents could see it. And a lot of people started leaving that company and going to the shipyards. And so I ended up running into a guy that I had worked with that was over there at the shipyards. And he's like, dude, you got to come apply. He's like, I'm a foreman there. You got a job. And so I was like, all right, dude, whatever, I'll do it. And then it was all uphill from there. So that company and this company that I work for now, like everybody, I just get along with everybody. Everybody's super cool. And there's even the guys that are jerks, they're like light jerks where you're able to just deal with it and get along with them anyway and be professional.
What does like the interview application process look like when you are trying to switch shops?
I don't know, because how it's been for me is I've worked for two companies on the production side. So what had happened was my wife had just given birth to our first child. And about a week after her birth, the non-union company laid me off.
Hmm.
And I had just been talking to a friend that told me about this shop up in Vancouver that paid like way more than what I think I was making like 16 bucks an hour at this non-union shop. And he's, yeah, they start you off at $22 an hour, all the benefits. You don't have to pay for your medical or your dental, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow, it sounds like I got to be really skilled at this. I don't think I'll be able to get a job there. So then they lay me off, and I was like, I'm going to go check out that job. So went into the front office and told them I was interested in the welding position. And they're like, oh, yeah, here's an application. And I filled it out. And she looked at it and she's like, oh, you worked at Gunderson. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you want to talk to the foreman right now? And I was like, sure. And this was like a
Sweet.
Friday afternoon. So the foreman came out and he looked at my application and he's like, got time for a weld test right now? And I was like, yeah, I got my gear in my car. So he's like, cool, let's go. So I go do the weld test. He looked at my welds. He's like, great, you're hired. And so that was the extent of that. And then with the shipyards, there was really no interview. All I had to do was a weld test. Pretty much already had the job because I was getting hooked up by a friend, but I did have to prove that I knew how to weld. And then as far as what I do now. So I still have all my weld certs, and I get pulled onto welding jobs here and there, but it's not what I do all day, every day anymore.
Mhm.
But the first company I worked for, I basically was dispatched. So the union says, this company needs a guy. Here's your new job. And then you go and you're working that. And so that's how it works, at least for the mechanical side. You can, as a journeyman, solicit work. So if I wanted to change companies, I could go to another sheet metal company in Portland and put in an application. And I assume there might be some kind of interview process, but I don't think that there is. Just mostly because I've just been used to being dispatched by the hall. And
Mhm.
so it's like they already know what your qualifications are and all that stuff.
So when you're leading your new team or when you do decide to bring people on, what do you look at for do you just do on the spot test or I guess what I'm getting at is are there things that are helpful to see from people before they're like on site
So
that help you understand?
So for me, just as if I'm running a job, I'm getting basically who the company's sending me. So the company's already
Mhm.
done whatever they do in order to hire some. Like when I got hired for this company, I was still an apprentice, and the company that I was working for just prior to them couldn't give me 40 hours a week. When I got into the apprenticeship, I actually took a bit of a pay cut. I was making $36 an hour at the shipyards, and they started me off $27 an hour as it was a 75% apprentice. Because of my experience in the trade and my longevity with the union as it was, they started me off at 75%. So it was about a $10 pay cut, but I had better benefits. So what had happened was I went to my business agent and I was like, hey, dude, like this company can't give me 40 hours like on a regular basis. And I'm already like making $10 less an hour than what I was before this apprenticeship. Am I like stuck with this company? What are my options? And he goes, did you work today? And I was like, no. He's, then you're out of work. He's like, give me a second. So he makes a call to this company and asks the superintendent there. He's like, hey, do you need an apprentice? And he goes, no. And he's like, what about an apprentice with weld certs? And he says, yes, I'll take an apprentice with weld certs. And that was my hiring process. And so then I went to work. The superintendent gave me a call and he's like, hey, you're going to be at this location on this day. So it was like Monday, I think, because I had a week of school that week, but it was a Forever 21, I believe, at the mall. We were installing some ductwork there, and basically just gave me the address, and that's how I got started. And then they send out the paperwork to the job site, so I just do all my paperwork there. And I did end up having to go in a couple days later for an orientation, just basically your typical orientation for any company that you go into. But yeah,
Cool. Are there any resources online you use or that the union has to benchmark yourself when you're looking at other jobs, like what your rate should be with blank welding
sure.
certs?
Our union, so nationally, we have a portal that each local has, or an online portal. So I can log on there. Pardon me, I can log on there, pay my dues, and my weld certs, because I got my weld certs through the hall, they have them on that website and they actually give me a little ID card with a little
Mhm.
QR code on it. So if I'm doing a weld job and an inspector comes and wants to see my certs, he can scan that QR code and it pulls up my certifications. And then they do have training resources through that portal. Even the company I work for has their own website where they have training resources for any of their employees to use. And then specifically as an apprentice, you have your own special portal through the hall. And on top of your classwork that you have when you go in for school, they also have training and stuff that's available to you on that as well.
And then do you use outside the union like any other resources like forums or YouTube
Oh,
are
dude,
you
YouTube all day, man. It's such an awesome tool. If I don't know how to do something or I'm trying to figure out how to do something, like some of the math, you learn a lot of math and I need a refresher on a formula, I'll pull it up on YouTube and it's yeah, YouTube's awesome.
do you ever look at non-union jobs on Indeed or anything like that or job boards?
It's for me, it doesn't make sense because our wages are I don't know if you're familiar with what prevailing wage is, but
Yeah.
so prevailing wage in our area is based on our wages. So because we are the highest paid trade or shop, or not shop, but the union workers are the highest paid in our area. So any non-union workers that work on a prevailing wage job are making our wages. I definitely support the union and unions, and would highly recommend anybody getting into the trades to join a union, because 90% of the time you're going to be making more money and having better benefits than you would a non-union job. And that's not, I'm not knocking non-union, because there are skilled people in non-union. They would just be a lot better off if they were in a union. Because if you're out of work, you go on what's called the out of work list, right? You don't have to look for work if you don't want to. You can. As a journeyman, you can. As an apprentice, you're out of luck. You can't solicit your work. You have to wait until you're dispatched. But as a journeyman, you can certainly solicit your work. But the hall does the work for you. As soon as a job comes up, they give you a call. They're like, hey, can you work? Yes. Okay, great. You're going to this company. And then off you go. And especially when things are busy, I think our out of work list right now is like insanely small. There's not a lot of people not working right now. So there's like lots of work in our area. Our collective bargaining agreement, they give you the booklet and it's got all your wages and stuff in there, your benefits. I'm happy that I had the experience under my belt that I did, because it certainly made the transition a lot easier, because was already a seasoned construction worker by the time I got in. I already know what I'm looking for as far as safety goes, and the experience and know how to build things. And blueprint reading, for example, that's something that I learned throughout my first few years working for that shop in Vancouver, because when I had got there, like all I knew how to do was weld. I happened to get lucky and get hooked up with a super dope foreman that would be like looking at prints, and I'd go over and just ask him questions about it every now and again. And he was more than happy to answer my questions. And then one day I saw some pretty simple prints sitting on his desk, and I was like, hey, are the parts for that available? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, do you mind if I build it? And he hands me the prints. He's like, go for it. And so I got to build this little project, and it was super, super simple. And from there, he would give me another set of prints, like, here, go build this. And things just got a little bit more and more complicated as time went on. And I learned how to read prints proficiently. So it definitely helped having that knowledge under my belt and being able to go to doing this. And the foreman that I actually work for now, the first job I worked for him on, I was still a first term apprentice. And he's like, you know how to read prints by any chance? And I was like the only guy, I was the first guy on the job site. The journeyman I was working with happened to be sick that day. So I show up that day, and I was like, yeah, I know how to read prints. He's like, okay, I'm going to hand you these prints. And I need you to go lay out where the duct's going to go on the second floor. And I was like, sure, no problem. So I went up there, I was able to lay it all out, and he came, checked my work. He's like, all right. So what actually happens, I didn't do any research, right? So I knew about the mechanical side, and I knew they made a lot more money than us. And I was always terrified of even trying to get in, because I didn't think I was smart enough or capable enough to do it, right? And so the first time I actually applied, I was 23 years old, and I went to the hall because I'd been talking, that foreman in particular, he was telling me how much he made. And I was like, shit, I should do that. I'll go apply. They have a whole application packet. You have to go take a college placement test that tests you on your reading and your math, and you have to score a certain amount in order to be even like considered for the apprenticeship. And you have to have like your high school diploma, yada, yada, whatever, like all this stuff that you got to put together in your application. One of them was a test through the employment department, which was called the work keys test. And so it's a 3-part test on your reading, your writing, your math, and then I don't even know what the third test was called. It was weird, right? It's like looking at schematics, and it starts off real simple, and all 3 tests get progressively harder as you go. So it gives you a real big bump on the application if you get an overall score of gold, right? So they give you the bronze, silver, silver, gold, and platinum were the 3 ways they scored the test. So reading and writing and math, I scored platinum on, and then the schematics, I scored silver on. So my overall score on the thing was silver. That's how they average it out. Whatever your lowest score is, that's your average score. So I was like, screw it. I'm not even going to include that in my application. So I got there, and the lady at the hall was like, you really should do the work keys test. You should really get that gold. Just keep working on it before you put your application in. And I was like, and it like made me doubt myself. And I was like, you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. So I did that for a few years, kept doing that for a few years. And then I actually had a helper that came and started working with me. And so I was teaching him how to weld, and he was helping me out with all this stuff. Right. And so I'm going to go apply for that apprenticeship. I was like, yeah, do it, dude. You should come with me. And I was like, yeah, I will. And so I think I was 27 at the time. Right. So we went together and we both applied. He applied like a few days before me, but I went in with my application. I had the same conversation with the same lady. And I was just like, you know what? Never mind. I don't think I'm cut out for this. So after I was working at the shipyards, work started slowing down. And I happened to be at a union meeting, and I ran into that business agent. He's like, hey, how come you're not in the apprenticeship? And I was like, well, I was like, I don't think I'm smart enough to be an apprentice. And he looks at me and he goes, have you met some of our apprentices? So he was like, dude, just put in your application, man. We need more apprentices. Just put in your application. I was like, all right, dude. So I got my application together and I put it in, and same lady, same conversation. And this time I was like, you know what? No, it's good. I'll do it without it. I'll take my chances. So she's like, okay. And then a couple days later, I got a call and they're like, hey, we want to interview you. So for the apprenticeship, there is an interview process, right? So it's 2-part interview. So your first interview is with a business agent, and they basically are just going over what the actual interview process is going to be like. And it's where you negotiate where you're going to start off on your wages. You have that opportunity there to do that. And so 75% was the highest that they would go for an apprentice, right? And so I decided to bite the bullet and just take it. And then the second interview is, I forget, the acronym is JATC. So it's the Joint something Training Center, whatever it is, right? And it's just basically representatives from each of the signatory contractors for that local are all part of this board. And they basically just interview you. Why do you want to be an apprentice? What do you think you can contribute to this program? What are your goals? Like all the typical stuff that you would get in an interview. And they're like, and for me, because it's getting in pretty late, I think I was, I'm 39 now. So I was getting in when I was 34 and still not young, right? So they're like, why now? What made you do it now? And I was like, honestly, because I was told to. And I told them the story of the business agent. They thought that was hilarious. And I was like, no, but like I've gotten to a point in my career where I feel like I'm just at a standstill, and this is a good opportunity to further my education. And I would like to run work is one of my goals. And I figured, like, even if I don't run work, I'm still going to be making a lot more money than what I was making, and learning new skills. They ended up deciding it's called indenturing you. So I got indentured right away. Usually there's like a waiting period to decide whether they're going to indenture you or not. But they did. I left the room, and then the business agent came out and said, we're going to indenture you right away. So I was basically like, I had to quit my job at the shipyards. Like they were ready to put me to work. So I had to go, and I was like, can I at least get 2 weeks to like not burn any bridges? And they're like, yeah, we'll give you 2 weeks. So I was like, okay. So I went to my boss and I told him I got into this apprenticeship, and I was putting my 2 weeks in. He's like, we're slowing down. Do you mind just leaving now? And I was like, I'm down. It sounds complicated, but it's not that bad. And I think that pretty much every apprenticeship program runs somewhat similarly to how we do it. It sounds terrifying, but it's really not that bad. And especially now, like there's like a huge shortage for construction workers. I think the average age of construction workers right now is like 42 or 43. And like I'm pushing 40, and I'm eligible to retire when I'm 58. So you got a bunch of guys that are going to be retiring soon, and they're not going to have the backup. So it's like we really desperately need to get a lot more people into it.
Yeah.
They do have their ratios that they got to keep up with. And that's And that really comes down to that's not necessarily the union thing. It is and it isn't. Like the general contractors or the customers will set their expectations as far as that goes. But I believe you can have, it's in our CBA, but I think it's something like you can have one journeyman to 3 apprentices because they don't want to put like 10 apprentices with one journeyman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot to take on, especially if you're working with people that are green. So they do try to keep those ratios in balance so that you're not overloading like a given project with too many green people, and also giving them the opportunity to actually grow and learn, because if there's somebody there that can actually show them what to do and how to do it properly.
Do you take pictures of your work that you're really proud of or share
I
them anywhere?
Yeah, I do take pictures when I can. There's times like the company that I'm at right now, you're not allowed to take pictures.
The
Um
sub, you can't take picture on
yeah,
the nuclear sub, you can't take pictures.
yeah. Oh, there I
That's
definitely could not take pictures. No, but the high tech plant I'm at either, I can't take pictures, but I do have a lot of pictures of stuff that I've worked on. I actually did a job. They have a primate research facility here, and they're like super real uneasy about people taking pictures. And it's the job that I was working on was a brand new building, and I literally could see one of their 1 acre enclosures with like just a bunch of monkeys running around and playing and stuff in it. And
crazy.
then yeah, there was another job that we did there where it was at their quarantine building, and I literally would park my car and I would probably be about 10 feet away from a cage with a bunch of baboons in it. And it was super cool. And it's controversial. Obviously, they're researching on animals and stuff like that, but it's for science and health. One of those things that I personally feel is a necessary evil. But it was a cool job. I got to design a whole system for the second job there, and it was super complicated, like minimal space. And I had to design the system in such a way that everything was within like the what's called the SMACNA standards. It's the standard for sheet metal for ductwork and stuff like that, right? Like you can't have like fittings that are too small and too oblong or whatever that just chokes the air. So I had to go through and try to figure this out, and was even going back to like my school textbooks and looking up fittings, like what fitting can I use here, and would do the math for it, and was like able to finally design this thing to fit inside and all be within the standards. I didn't even have to cheat anything, which was awesome. So it was, because it was getting to the point where sometimes you got to cheat stuff. It's like you can't get around it. But I was able to do it without doing that. And I was super proud of it. But I took pictures of that.
Cool. And do you and your buddies or coworkers share the photos, or do you share them anywhere online? Or
Yeah. So we've got like Facebook groups that people will share to. I don't, because I'm always afraid of criticism.
yeah, they
I joke like I'm the world's okayest welder. Like I'm definitely not like some immaculate great welder, but hey, I can pass my ultrasound test and I can pass my x-rays. It might not look super pretty, but it's solid. And I see these posts on Facebook every now and again of welding. And I don't know if it's just particularly with welders, but everybody's got to say something like, oh, that looks like shit. Why would you do it like that? This is how I would do it. And it's just one of those things where I'll throw down a really nice one and be like, oh, I want to share this so bad, but I just don't want to take the criticism. I can't
yeah,
do it.
if it were more the guy who taught you how to read blueprints and things, do you still stay in contact with people like that? Or is there any
I do, yeah. And it's usually through Facebook, honestly. So him in particular, he retired and he took a whole year off, and then he ended up getting his real estate license. So he sells houses now. But every now and again, I'll give him a call out of the blue and just say what's up. But he's definitely somebody that I look up to, that definitely helped me build a foundation for myself. So I attribute a lot of my success to him because he took the time to didn't get out of here. There's guys that are like that. You want to learn something and you ask a question and they'll tell you to get lost. But this guy was like, no, he said, yeah, here, come look at this stuff with me. And definitely learned so much from him, especially when you get into building things, especially with heavy steel, you have to worry about how you weld it, right? Because if you weld too much in one zone, you actually start creating shrinkage and you can warp your whole project and it just gets totally screwed. And he really took the time to teach me, like, this is what you got to look out for. This is how I would do it. And he's definitely, and I had coworkers, like I try not to, especially now there, I work with so many cool people that like, I don't have a problem with it, but I was real skeptical of it starting off because you worked with some cool guys, you work with some assholes, and the assholes want to be friends with you on Facebook. And then it's, I don't really want to add you, but you already sent me a friend request. So I do keep in contact with a lot of old coworkers.